The prison yard was loud, chaotic, filled with the clatter of chains, shouts, and laughter. Inmates leaned against walls, smoked in corners, and marked their territory with confident, predatory stares. But something, or someone, shifted the atmosphere instantly. Steven Seagal walked in. No entourage. No guards whispering warnings. No cameras following him. Just the unmistakable presence of a man who had faced danger countless times before, and whose calm was almost unnerving. He wore a faded black leather jacket, plain jeans, and scuffed boots. Nothing flashy. Just enough to look like another prisoner. The gang noticed immediately. They thought this was easy. A quiet guy in worn clothes, probably weak. They laughed, nudging each other. Fresh meat, one muttered, grinning as he sized him up. You think you're tough? Another sneered, stepping closer. You're in our yard now. You play by our rules. Steven didn't react. Not a flinch. Not a word. Just a slow, steady gaze that seemed to see everything. The weapons, the angles, the tension in every muscle around him. The leader of the gang, a hulking man with tattoos crawling up his arms and neck, leaned forward. We don't like new faces. You're either with us or... His voice dropped, threatening. Seconds stretched into eternity. Every inmate watching, waiting for the fight, the explosion of violence. But Steven remained still. Calm. Unmoving. He didn't need to talk. He didn't need to fight yet. No one knew his secret. Not the gang, not the other inmates, not even the guards keeping a distant eye. They didn't know that this man was a former Marine raider, trained for hand-to-hand combat, survival, and warfare beyond imagination. They didn't know that every movement he made, even standing there, carried precision and lethal efficiency. The gang's confidence was palpable, but fragile. They laughed at the wrong moment, nudged the wrong man, and underestimated the quiet presence before them. Then came the first mistake. One thug stepped too close, grabbed his arm, and leaned in with arrogance. Steven's eyes narrowed just slightly, a tiny shift, but enough to send a chill down the spine of anyone watching. In that calm, measured gaze was a warning. You just triggered the wrong man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Backhand index pointing right. What would you do if you were surrounded by danger and realized your target was far more dangerous than anyone could imagine? Most of the inmates in the yard had only seen Steven Seagal on a TV screen. Action star. Martial artist. Movie legend. That's all they knew. The tattoos on some arms and the scars on some faces may have intimidated him, but he didn't need a screen to prove who he was. He carried something far more dangerous than fame. What they didn't know was that Steven Seagal wasn't just a movie star. He was a former Marine raider, trained in the most extreme forms of combat the military has to offer. Stealth operations, hand-to-hand combat, hostage rescues, advanced weapons. He had mastered it all. Every movement, every reaction, every breath carried years of training and experience designed to survive the impossible. But that past didn't define him to those around him. To the gang, he was just another prisoner. A quiet man in scuffed boots and a leather jacket. No one expected trouble from him. And that's exactly why he walked in unarmed, unannounced, with a calmness that unsettled anyone paying attention. The prison wasn't just a building. It was a world with its own rules. Territory, power, fear, they all played their games thinking they controlled everything. The gang believed they had the upper hand. They had the numbers, the swagger, and the audacity to push anyone who looked weaker than them. Steven walked slowly through the yard, scanning the perimeter without appearing to. His eyes moved in precise patterns, noting every potential threat, every angle of escape, and every weakness in the gang's formation. To an untrained eye, it might have looked like he was wandering aimlessly. But in reality, every step was calculated. Every pause deliberate. Every glance a message. The gang noticed him. They whispered among themselves. He's quiet, too quiet, one muttered. Another laughed, shaking his head. Looks like he doesn't even know he's in the wrong yard yet. Confidence. Arrogance. Both thick in the air. They started circling him, talking loudly, showing off, thinking this was a show. You're either with us or against us, the leader said, smirking. And I don't like new faces. Steven didn't respond. His lips didn't move. His expression didn't change. But inside, his mind was calculating every possible scenario. The gang leader's reach, the angle of the sun, the placement of guards, the proximity of weapons hidden in pockets and belts. Every detail mattered. Every second counted. Time seemed to stretch. The tension was palpable. Other prisoners stepped back, watching silently, sensing that something about this man was different. There was a calmness to him that didn't belong in a place filled with chaos and aggression. It wasn't fear, not yet, but it was awareness. They didn't know it, but they were already being judged. And in that judgment, a mistake waiting to happen. Because in the mind of a trained Marine raider, arrogance is the first weakness you exploit. Overconfidence is the easiest entry point to control a situation. And the gang, with all their bravado, had given him both. Backhand index pointing right. Have you ever walked into a situation where everyone underestimated you? Where appearances created false power, and silence carried more strength than words ever could? The gang continued circling Stephen, their laughter ringing across the prison yard like a challenge. You think you're untouchable? One sneered, stepping closer, cracking his knuckles. We run this place. Don't think a quiet guy like you can change that. Stephen didn't respond. Not a word. Not a flinch. Just a measured gaze, scanning every face, every movement, every twitch of muscle. The air was thick with arrogance, but also with danger. And danger had just entered their world in the form of a man they had underestimated. Another inmate laughed too loudly, showing off his tattoos and scars. What's the matter, buddy? Can't even look at us. He leaned in, trying to intimidate him physically, thinking proximity would equal power. The yard seemed to shrink around Stephen. The gang's confidence was almost suffocating. But he didn't flinch. He didn't back down. He didn't even raise a hand. Minutes stretched. Every thug waiting for him to react. Every prisoner watching the brewing confrontation like it was a slow-motion movie. The tension was almost unbearable, each second ticking louder than the last. One of the smaller gang members laughed nervously, nudging his friend. He's not scared, but he's quiet. That's weird, right? You're learning the hard way, the leader snapped. We don't take kindly to silence. And then it happened. The first mistake. A thug, trying to assert dominance, grabbed Stephen's arm roughly. He expected resistance, maybe a fight, but he expected weakness. He didn't get it. Stephen's eyes narrowed, just slightly, but that small motion carried more weight than 1,000 threats. It was a subtle warning, almost imperceptible, but enough to send a ripple of unease through the gang. You don't understand who you're messing with, Stephen said softly, and the words carried a calm authority that made them pause. Not angry. Not aggressive. Calm. Dangerous. The gang leader smirked, trying to hide his unease. I think I do, he said, stepping closer, chest puffed, voice loud. You think you're special? You think fame makes you safe? No one knew yet that Stephen had survived situations far deadlier than this yard. He had faced enemies armed with guns, knives, and superior numbers. He had been trained to anticipate moves before they happened, to remain calm under fire, and to exploit overconfidence like a weapon. Every inch of him exuded precision and control, but the gang didn't see it yet. They saw only a quiet man in a jacket, someone they assumed they could intimidate. Other inmates began to notice. They watched silently as Stephen didn't respond to the threats, the shoves, or the mocking laughter. Something was different. The usual chaos of the yard, the bluster, the posturing, was shifting. The gang, for all their bravado, was being tested. And the balance of power was about to change. Stephen inhaled slowly. A single, controlled breath. The kind of breath a trained fighter takes before making the first move, not out of anger but out of certainty. The yard had grown silent. Not the quiet of peace. Not the calm of respect. But the sharp, uneasy silence of men realizing they might have made a grave mistake. The gang circled Stephen like predators unsure of their prey. The leader's smirk had faded, replaced by a twitch of nervousness. Every eye in the yard was on him. Waiting. Watching. Anticipating the first move. One thug, bolder than the rest, stepped forward and grabbed Stephen by the shoulder. Thought you were tough, huh? He sneered. Time to prove it. For a moment, nothing happened. Stephen didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He just let the hand rest there. The thug's confidence swelled. He laughed and shoved him slightly, expecting resistance. But Stephen moved like lightning, so fast, so precise that it seemed almost unreal. With a subtle twist of his wrist and a shift of his weight, the thug was unbalanced, disarmed, and stumbling back before he could even react. His friends froze, mouths open. It was the first moment the yard realized that this wasn't just a quiet man. They had underestimated a former Marine raider. Stephen didn't shout. He didn't need to. One controlled movement had spoken volumes. Calm. Efficient. Deadly if provoked further. The gang leader took a step back, fear creeping into his eyes. Wait, what? He stammered. He had thought this was just intimidation, posturing, a fight he could control. But suddenly the reality of his misjudgment hit him like a freight train. Stephen's voice broke the silence, soft but cutting. You think this is a game? That your strength in numbers matters? You don't even know who you're dealing with, The other inmates around the yard whispered to each other, realizing that every threat, every shove, every mocking laugh had been a mistake. And the truth about the man in the black jacket was only beginning to emerge. Stephen moved slowly, deliberately, making the gang leader the focus of his attention. "Violence isn't always loud," he said. "Sometimes it's measured. Sometimes it's precise. Sometimes it's silent." The leader's eyes darted to the men around him, searching for support. But hesitation had already set in. Confidence crumbled. What once seemed like dominance now looked like reckless arrogance. The small movements, the subtle shifts in Stephen's stance, the way his hands hovered lightly but ready, spoke louder than any words could. Every member of the gang could see it. This was a man who could neutralize them all without breaking a sweat, without raising his voice, without even shouting. And then came the moment that would define the encounter. Another thug lunged, attempting to assert dominance by rushing him from the side. Stephen sidestepped smoothly, guiding the man past him with minimal contact, so precise it was almost like a dance. The man crashed into another inmate, knocking both of them off balance. Chaos ensued, not from Stephen, but from the gang's own failed assumptions. The yard erupted in stunned murmurs. The leader stumbled back, finally grasping the truth. Oh no," he whispered. Fear replaced arrogance. This wasn't the quiet guy they could push around. This was someone whose skills, experience, and calm presence could dismantle their confidence in an instant. Stephen's gaze swept the yard once more. Calm, observant. Every man who had tried to intimidate him now faced the harsh realization. They had misjudged someone far more dangerous than they could imagine. He spoke again, voice low but firm. "Arrogance is dangerous. Overconfidence is lethal. And disrespect comes at a cost." The gang froze. The inmates around them watched in awe and fear. Respect had not been demanded. It had been earned in seconds through subtlety, skill, and undeniable presence. This was the moment the yard would never forget. The moment the gang realized they had stepped into a world far beyond their understanding. The quiet man in the leather jacket was not just a movie star. He was a force. A former Marine raider. A man who could take on anyone, anywhere, and win. And now they were learning the hard way. Backhand index pointing right. Have you ever underestimated someone? Judged them by silence, by appearance, by arrogance? How did it feel when reality hit? The yard was silent now, but not with calm. It was the tense, almost unbearable quiet of men realizing they had miscalculated, that the danger standing before them was far greater than they could have imagined. The gang leader stumbled back, chest heaving, eyes wide. For the first time, fear replaced arrogance. He had expected a movie star, someone famous, someone flashy, but harmless. He had thought intimidation, threats, and posturing would dominate the situation. He was wrong. Seagal's calm presence radiated control. Every inch of him, from the steady gaze to the relaxed but deliberate stance, screamed lethal expertise. He didn't need to raise a fist, yell, or shout. One measured movement, one subtle adjustment of weight, and the gang's first attempt at dominance had already crumbled. The leader swallowed hard, glancing at his men. They too were frozen. The bravado that had ruled the yard just minutes ago had dissolved. Every shove, every mocking laugh, every arrogant step toward Stephen now felt like a reckless mistake. Then came the whispers. You weren't kidding," muttered one inmate, backing away. "He really is, military. Former Marine raider," another added, voice shaking. "Trained for everything." The gang leader's hands trembled. "This isn't possible," he stammered. We thought he was just some quiet guy. Just a movie star. That's all." Stephen didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let the reality sink in. He observed the yard. Every angle. Every potential threat. Every nervous twitch. Every sign of regret. And then the bigger truth hit, not just for the gang but for everyone watching. "This isn't about me," Stephen said, voice calm but carrying a weight that made the air itself tense. "This is about the choices you make. About arrogance. About underestimating someone based on what you see, what you assume, or what you want to believe." The leader tried to find words, but his voice faltered. We didn't know, we just..." Stephen's gaze didn't waver. "You didn't know, yes. But you judged. You disrespected. You assumed power was only numbers and size. You thought you could dominate. That's your mistake." Other inmates shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded silently, realizing they too had learned this lesson in subtle ways. Appearances, bravado, and posturing meant nothing against experience, skill, and calm confidence. Then Stephen moved. Slowly, deliberately. He walked toward the gang leader, each step measured, each motion precise. The leader stumbled backward instinctively. Not out of fear of a fight, but out of understanding the magnitude of misjudgment. "Look around you," Stephen said, his voice steady. "Every choice you make has consequences. Every action carries weight. You thought this yard was yours. That you controlled it. That strength meant arrogance." The gang leader's eyes widened. We didn't know." "You didn't know," Stephen repeated. "And that's the problem. You assumed. You assumed I was weak. You assumed silence meant compliance. You assumed arrogance would win. But you're wrong on all counts." A guard had been observing from a distance, unsure whether to intervene. But Stephen didn't need intervention. The lesson was already written in every movement, every pause, every subtle demonstration of control. Then came the confession. One of the lower-ranking gang members, shaking, spoke up. They were planning something," he admitted, voice low. "Some of us, we were going to hurt a new prisoner. Cause chaos. Take control." The leader's face went pale. "What, you told him?" "Yes," the inmate stammered. He knows everything now." Stephen's gaze swept over them all. "Calm, observant, deadly. Now you understand," he said. "Power isn't about numbers, intimidation, or fear. Power is control, precision, and understanding consequences before they happen. And arrogance blinds you to all of it." The gang realized in that moment that this wasn't just about disrespect. It wasn't about bravado or territory. This was about survival, about respect earned and mistakes corrected. Every misjudgment they had made had been catalogued in silence, and the cost of ignoring it could have been fatal. Stephen stepped back, allowing the weight of his presence to settle. "Learn this. You never judge someone by appearance, silence, or reputation alone. Respect is not given. It's earned, and it can be reclaimed, but only if humility follows." The yard remained quiet. Fear and awe mixed together. The gang leader's chest heaved, his voice barely a whisper. We should have known." "Yes," Stephen said softly, "you should have." The prison yard was tense, the kind of silence that felt heavy, almost suffocating. Every inmate had stopped talking. Every eye was on Steven Seagal. The gang leader's chest heaved. His bravado, once loud and confident, had evaporated into shaky hands and uncertain stares. Stephen didn't raise his voice. He didn't move with aggression. Every inch of him exuded control. Years of training, combat, and discipline had honed him into a man who could read every situation before it unfolded, who could neutralize threats without a single unnecessary move. The gang leader tried one last attempt at dominance, stepping forward with a shaky smile. "Look, maybe we can talk about this?" Stephen's gaze cut through him like steel. "Calm, unyielding." "Talk," he said softly. "Do you think this is about talking? About words? You've already chosen your actions. Your disrespect. Your arrogance. And now you'll live with the consequences." Other inmates shifted uneasily. Some whispered to each other, realizing that the lesson was as much about judgment as it was about survival. Arrogance had blinded the gang, and now they were facing a man who had seen far worse, who had survived impossible odds, and who could act decisively when necessary. Stephen's voice remained even, controlled. "I didn't come here to prove power. I didn't come here to show fear. I came here to see how you treat those you think are beneath you. And what you've shown me is exactly what I expected. Arrogance. Disrespect. Foolishness." The gang leader swallowed hard. His voice was barely audible. We didn't know." "Exactly," Stephen said, a slight nod acknowledging the truth. "You didn't know. And that's your mistake. Mistakes cost people in this yard every day. But today, you'll be given a chance to learn. If you survive it." He looked around at the gang and the other prisoners. Every movement was deliberate, every glance calculated. You think strength is size, numbers, and noise. But strength is control. Strength is judgment. Strength is knowing when to act and when to hold back. The leader's knees felt weak. He realized finally that intimidation had no power here. Not against someone who had faced life-or-death situations far more dangerous than anything this yard could throw at him. Stephen took a step forward, closer to the leader, slow and deliberate. "Your arrogance almost cost you everything. It made you reckless. It made your men careless. And it exposed your weakness. And weakness, in this world, gets punished." The leader's jaw tightened. His mind raced. Every second that passed made him realize just how close he had come to disaster. Stephen's eyes swept the yard one last time. Calm. Assessing. Then he spoke, not loudly, but with the weight of someone who had spent a lifetime making decisions where hesitation could mean death. You will leave the yard today alive but humbled. Your arrogance has been measured. Your disrespect noted. You will remember this lesson. Not because I harmed you, but because you almost brought it upon yourselves. Consider this your decision point. Will you change or will you continue down the path of foolishness? The gang leader looked around at his men. The younger inmates avoided his gaze. Their bravado had collapsed. They were confronted with a truth far greater than what they had assumed. And in that truth they saw the magnitude of their misjudgment. Stephen paused. Every man in the yard held their breath. Then, with deliberate calm, he turned and walked away. Not aggressively. Not in triumph. Just control, measured, and silent authority. The leader and his gang remained frozen. Humility, fear, and awe mixed in their expressions. They had been tested. They had been judged. And now they had been spared, but only because Seagal chose restraint. Stephen's words lingered in the yard long after he left. Arrogance blinds. Disrespect teaches lessons. Strength is measured not by how loud you are, but by how wisely you act. Learn it, or the next time, there won't be a choice. In the silence that followed, whispers spread. Respect had been earned. Fear had been instilled. And every inmate understood one truth. Some people are not to be underestimated. Some men's calm is more dangerous than others' aggression. Some men, like Steven Seagal, carry consequences in every measured step they take. The yard was quiet now, not with peace but with a tense, reflective silence. Even the guards had stepped back, unsure whether to intervene, sensing that the lesson had already been delivered. Steven Seagal walked slowly toward the exit, every step deliberate, measured, calm. The gang he had just confronted remained frozen, their bravado gone, replaced by fear, respect, and an uneasy understanding. What had started as arrogance and intimidation had transformed into something far more powerful, a lesson they would never forget. The leader, chest still heaving, looked at his men. For the first time he saw the fear, confusion, and regret in their faces. We underestimated him, he muttered, voice trembling. We were wrong. The younger inmates nodded, heads lowered. They had witnessed something rare, a man who didn't need to raise his voice, swing his fists, or act violently to command control. He had used restraint, presence, and skill to show the consequences of arrogance. Stephen paused at the gate, looking back one last time. His calm, piercing gaze swept over the yard, the gang, and the prisoners who had watched silently from the edges. He didn't speak harshly. He didn't shout. He didn't humiliate. He simply said, "Respect isn't given. Respect is earned. And the measure of a man isn't how loudly he shouts or how many people fear him. It's how wisely he acts and how carefully he weighs consequences before he chooses aggression." The leader swallowed hard, finally understanding the weight of what had just happened. Every threat, every shove, every arrogant laugh had been catalogued in Stephen's mind. But there was no vengeance here, only awareness, discipline, and the quiet authority of a man who had survived impossible odds. One of the thugs dared to speak, voice small and shaky. "So, we're spared?" Stephen nodded slightly. "You are. But don't mistake restraint for weakness. Arrogance is dangerous. Disrespect has consequences. And next time, it may not be mercy that decides your fate." The gang leader's knees felt weak. He glanced at the other men. They had been tested and the results were clear. Arrogance had been stripped away. Fear had been instilled. And respect had been earned, not through threats, but through a demonstration of skill, precision, and calm control. The yard slowly began to return to motion, but the energy had shifted. The whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see him?" one inmate muttered. "He didn't even need to fight, and still, he won." "He's military," another added, voice barely audible. "Trained, like a Marine raider. You can't mess with that." The gang leader stood still, unable to look Stephen directly in the eye. The lesson had sunk in deeper than fear. It was a humbling truth. Confidence built on arrogance and numbers alone meant nothing against someone with skill, experience, and calm authority. Stephen didn't linger. He left the yard quietly, his presence still commanding even as he moved away. The lesson had been delivered. Respect had been established. And the gang knew that their arrogance had cost them something more valuable than pride. It had cost them ignorance of reality. In the hours that followed, stories spread through the prison. Inmates spoke in hushed tones about the man in the leather jacket, about the calm authority, about the lesson in measured restraint. Steven Seagal wasn't just a movie star. He was a man whose experience and skill transcended fame. A man whose silence spoke louder than any words. A man whose judgment carried consequences for anyone foolish enough to challenge it. And for the gang, the lesson lingered in every interaction thereafter. Respect became more than a word. It became an understanding of power, humility, and consequence. The arrogance that had once ruled the yard had been replaced by cautious awareness, not just of Steven Seagal, but of the principle he had demonstrated: never underestimate anyone. Steven himself returned to solitude, calm, collected, aware that his presence had shifted the balance of power in the yard. He didn't need acknowledgement, thanks, or praise. The lesson was enough. Actions, not words, had defined the encounter. He knew the power of restraint. He knew the weight of consequences. And he knew that respect, real earned respect, could never be forced, only demonstrated. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, the gang leader finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. We understand. We won't make that mistake again." Steven didn't respond. He didn't need to. His calm presence, his experience, and the memory of what had just happened said it all. The yard had learned a lesson they would never forget. Respect is earned, arrogance blinds, and underestimating someone can be a costly mistake. And in that quiet, reflective moment, one truth remained clear. Steven Seagal hadn't needed to fight to win. He had won through presence, skill, and the quiet authority of a man who had faced far worse, and survived.